I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, especially with this distinguished group of people. I was in the FBI for 24 years. I studied criminology in a master's program and really appreciate what everybody here has talked about. I defended civil liberties and civil rights for a long time. I ran those programs in the FBI. So I certainly appreciate the chance to be here. But what I want to talk about today is very different from what my colleagues have talked about. And that is what is happening right now, not only here in this country, but around the world. And that is the threat to our critical infrastructure. So I'm not going to focus on some of these fraud schemes, but I'm going to focus on something that I think is much, much greater, much, much more dangerous and threatening to our very way of life, and quite frankly, in some ways, even to our existence. Because I've called this an existential threat. Meaning that the results of some of the things I'm going to talk about could actually result in loss of life. Certainly it's resulted in loss of businesses over the years, but actually in loss of life. So President Bush said that other than a weapon of mass destruction going off in one of our major cities, this threat that we face from cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure is the most significant threat other than a weapon of mass destruction. And to take politics off the table, President Barack Obama said that this is today one of the most significant threats to our economic and our national security. So what is it exactly that I'm talking about? I'm talking about the threats to all of the information that's contained in this country. And again, not just in the US, but this is a worldwide issue. But all of the information that's contained, all of our intellectual property, all of the research and development that we do, military strategies and secrets, corporate strategies and secrets, financial data, personally identifiable information, all the information about you, whether it's your bank account information or your healthcare records, private conversations that you've had exchanged on email with people, that is at risk because of a whole host of adversaries that are very, very interested in obtaining that information. Why is this occurring? It's because everything that we do is pushed to the network, right? We have grown up, some of us haven't grown up in it. I immigrated into it. Some people are digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. My two daughters are natives. They want to push everything to the network. Companies invest in technology and therefore feel that because we've put all this money into the technology, we need to push everything to the network. We need to use it. Now, quite frankly, I believe that the internet is probably one of, if not the most significant advancement in our lifetime. And it certainly makes us much more effective and much more efficient as a society. And we're better off because of it, but there's so many inherent risks. And because we're pushing all that data, and because that data is incredibly valuable to a whole host of folks, and because that data rests on an infrastructure that is inherently insecure, it's at risk. So who are the groups that are targeting this data? There are three that I'll talk about, and if I had some more time, I'd talk about some others. But the threats to this data, I'm going to talk primarily about corporations, not about your home, that's another story, but about corporations, organizations, large networks. The military, the government, and large corporations are being targeted by organized crime groups, first of all. Groups of people who have met online, who coordinate online in a collaborative way, to target information that they can steal and sell. When you think about, and I talk about the theft of data, picture an 18-wheel truck, 18-wheeler, big cargo truck, backed up to a major company or a government agency, and a dozen guys walking inside with boxes and boxes and boxes, filling those cargo trucks up, and then driving down to the harbor and jumping onto a freighter and taking all that data to another country. This is happening every single day electronically, where terabytes of data, tremendous volumes of data, are being sucked out of our corporations and our governments, our military, our educational facilities. every single day. These foreign intelligence services are looking to take this data and they want to empower their home industries, their manufacturing facilities to become more advanced, to have a leg up and a greater competitive advantage against other societies, other organizations. We had a case when I was in the FBI where an organization lost 10 years worth of research and development that they valued at $1 billion, literally over just a couple of days, $1 billion in a couple of days. This is happening all the time, regularly. I've said that there are two types of organizations: those that have been breached and those that don't yet know that they've been breached. And I can tell you this because when I ran the FBI, my agents weekly, dozens of times a week, went out and knocked on the doors of companies around this country and told them that their network had been breached. And in many cases, these companies said, absolutely not, couldn't have happened. We've talked to our CIO. She says everything's fine, couldn't have happened. And we say, well, actually, we found your data. In the course of an unrelated investigation, we found your data, and it's over here. So it's actually, you have been breached. And lo and behold, companies go back and they do some type of assessment and they remediate their network. And sure enough, yes, we were breached. And it turns out we were breached 4 months ago. Or, in a couple of cases, 2 years ago, we were breached. Which means that these adversaries had access to every single piece of data that resided on or transmitted on that network for that period of time. 4 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is. Complete access to that data. We've had terrorist organizations that have gotten up and said publicly, they've put out videos just recently, they've just been out, you could probably find them out on YouTube, that we want to attack the West. We can attack the West using electronic jihad, and we can target the financial services sector because that's where the power of the West is. And rise up, and if you want to support jihad, you can support jihad electronically through these types of attacks. So foreign intelligence services, organized crime groups collaborating, targeting the financial services sector, and terrorist groups who want to impact critical infrastructure. So imagine, if you will, we all saw seven years ago Hurricane Katrina and the devastation that was applied against that city, that area of the country because of a natural disaster. But imagine, if you will, because in that case, after just a few days of no power, no water, people were killing each other. There were deaths in the streets there. But imagine if the electricity went out in a major city for 3 days, we've seen it, natural disaster, 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, because the generators that they're targeting that are about the size of this auditorium here, they don't stock them at Home Depot. It takes months or years to actually manufacture these things and put them online. We know that they have the intent and that they are actively seeking to try and disable critical infrastructure, electric, sewer, water, transportation. So there's a whole host of groups that are trying to do this. So that's the good news. Let me tell you the bad news. Once the adversaries have access to these networks that I'm talking about, and they are able to get access, they typically do it by sending malware through an email, but once they have access to the network and they're able to work their way throughout that network, first of all, it's unlikely that they'll ever be completely removed from that network because some of these networks are so broad. When I'm talking about government networks or corporate networks, there may be 100,000 or 500,000 hosts, computers on a network. And once they have access to a network, they're able to work their way through that network. They put in some back doors, and they ensure that they've got a foothold into that network for a long time. What I've been talking about primarily is the confidentiality of the data, people that can steal this information and look at this information and use it for their personal gain. Military secrets, research and development, financial information they can turn into cash. But that's just one of the things that they can do. Because what an adversary can do when they have access to this network, and they've got the depth and breadth of these networks that I'm describing, they can actually change the data. So the very data that you rely on, the very data that companies rely on, can be manipulated. Moving a decimal point a couple of places to the left or the right, changing healthcare records, changing coordinates on a weapon system. They can change the data. They can also completely destroy the data. They can wipe the data. There was a case just a few weeks ago in the media about a company in another country that they had an attack. According to the media reports, they lost 30,000 computers that were completely destroyed. The hard drives were written over. They were irretrievable, irrecoverable. There are 30,000 doorstops. They can't be used. We had a case when I was in the Bureau, a healthcare organization that had an adversary. This was an organized crime group who breached the network. They encrypted all the data, and they rendered it unreadable to the users. And then they contacted them and said, hey, we'll give you the key for all this data. You can decrypt it, but it'll cost $150,000. So with that access, it's not only the confidentiality of the data that they can steal it and see it, but they can change it and they can destroy it. So it's a huge risk. So what's the idea, my idea, change idea, that I've been talking about for a long time while I was in the Bureau and then moving into the private sector? What can we do? I've worked on the government policy and strategy. Operationally for the FBI, I ran our cases, but I also worked on the broader US government policy and strategy with a whole host of folks. We focused for a long time on reducing the vulnerabilities. And if any of you have followed this threat, you've heard about, you've got to have a firewall and you've got to have good passwords. You've got to make sure you use two-factor authentication to get into your financial accounts, which are really, really important things to do because you have to have a good defense and you have to have multiple layers of defense. But defense in this case is not the answer because the capabilities of the adversaries that I've seen, they are able to jump over the firewall. They are getting by the most sophisticated defenses. And a sophisticated adversary that can get access to that network is the most dangerous. So what I think that we need to do is rather than being solely vulnerability focused and trying to raise the defenses, we actually have to identify who the threat is and then target the threat. And I think from a policy perspective, from a political perspective, from a legislative perspective, there's an awful lot that we can do to change this game and to target the adversary. So the US government national strategy has called for diplomatic sanctions or economic sanctions against governments that may be targeting the US to steal this information. From a law enforcement side, certainly going back to my life in the Bureau, going out and proactively identifying people and arresting them and taking them off the playing field, that changes the game because if they're off the field, they can't be targeting these companies. But I think private sector companies can do the same thing. They can start to identify who the adversaries are. They can identify what they're doing, how they're doing it, why they're doing it, and they can change their policies on their networks. They can make themselves more resilient, and they can start to target and mitigate the threat. I don't see this threat going away anytime soon. We only get more advanced. We only introduce more technology. I would venture to say that everybody in this room, on their belt or in their purse, has a computer that is more powerful than the computers that put a man on the moon in 1969. I call that the expansion of the network. It's not just corporate networks. It's the expansion of the network. This threat is getting more dangerous. The risks and the stakes are high. And together, in a collaborative way, I think the private sector, you all here in your capacity, whether it be as part of an organization or a corporation or even as a citizen, understanding what this threat is, what the risk is to our way of life, what the risk is to our economy and our national security, everybody here can have an impact, a positive impact on changing the game. Because the status quo today is unsustainable. We will not survive this. I don't believe that we will. I think that the implications, our reliance on the technology is much, much too high, and we've got to change the game. That's a conversation for another day. There's a lot of political and policy type issues, legislative issues that we can discuss. But I just want to plant that seed because it really starts with awareness and for the public to understand what's happening every single day and the risk and the threat that you face. So I challenge each of you to educate yourselves. I challenge you to take part in this and to participate as part of the solution. I have 8 seconds left. How about that? Thank you very much.